Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Definition, and it's time to ratchet up the tension with the prequel to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I kinda have mixed feelings about the season, and throughout this video we're going to be breaking down its entire plot, how it aligns with the movie's story, our thoughts on it, and the show's ending. There's going to be heavy spoilers here for both the show and film, so if you haven't had a chance to watch them yet, then you'd have to be insane to keep watching this video. Terrible jokes as always, but drop a thumbs up if you enjoy the crap. Now with that out of the way, thank you for clicking this, let's get into Ratched. Okay, so Ratched takes place before the events of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In the movie, we followed an older version of Ratched as she faced off against Randall McMurphy, played by Jack Nicholson. Ratched was very stoic throughout the film, and she barely showed any emotion. She represented taking away one's individuality, and she very much forced the patients to conform to order. Juxtaposing this, Randall taught them to express themselves, to disobey the rules, and ultimately get the most out of life. The film culminated with Randall attacking Ratched, and eventually he was lobotomized because of it. Randall had become emotionless, almost similar to Ratched, and I remember this felt like a real gut punch the first time I saw the film. However, in an act of mercy, Randall was killed by another patient known as the Chief, who'd promised to escape with him. Though he could have been a slave to the system, metaphorically this suffocation allowed Randall to escape the confines of the asylum in death, and the film ended with the Chief breaking out of this prison, showing that both characters had escaped the cage they'd been forced into. The series sort of follows this motif, however it ends very much in the opposite way to the film, with Ratched in a position where she should be free, but instead she's haunted by fear. Now in the finale she overcomes it and realizes that she won't be a slave to the trappings of her own mind, and the season is very much about facing things head on instead of running away from them. We'll get into it all in just a bit, but predominantly we follow Mildred Ratched, played by Sarah Paulson, as she slowly transforms into the character we love to hate. The season opens with the murder of a priest house, which is carried out by Edmund Tolson, aka the clergy killer. He becomes integral to the plot, but early on we see the contradiction in the church, as one of the priests is supposed to be celibate, but he keeps an underwear catalogue under his bed. I've never seen such lewd imagery. Now the church was very much tied to the film, and at one point there was even a patient that took medication like it was communion, showing that the movie was commenting on the ties between the institution and the church. In the show, nurses are referred to God's angels, they dress in attire similar to nuns, and pretty much oversee the operations at the institution. The church very much tells people how to live their lives, and mirroring this, the asylum forces people to act in a certain way. We learn the clergy, though thought to be compassionate, simply were not, and similar to this, we see Ratched go on a journey in which he's required to help people, but in fact does the opposite most of the time. Ratched manipulates her way into working in the hospital, which is also used as grounds for a talking point to get the governor re-elected, but it doesn't really go anywhere, as do a lot of the plot points in the season. Now, throughout the series, she poisons the patients with overdoses in order to make herself seem like a savior, talks them into ending their life, and oh my god, is that Jeffrey? Jeffrey, my man. Oh no! Now she oversees the lobotomy being made commonplace, and we know from our own history that this operation was done to pretty much leave someone in an almost constantly sedated state. Ratched would of course come to use a lobotomy on Randall, and seeing this seed planted here is a pretty terrifying watch. We see how excessive treatment is used on a lesbian, as this was looked upon as a disordered mind, but then Ratched herself falls in love with a woman named Gwendolyn, once more showing the contradiction between treatment and those using it. I kind of feel that, though this is true to Paulson's personality, it's gonna anger some fans who viewed Ratched as more of an asexual, machine-like person that was completely unfeeling and unsympathetic. However, I think it's handled pretty well here, and seeing her admitted in episode 7 does feel genuine, even though it's not necessarily close to the source material. Now, a big reveal that comes early on is that Mildred and Edmund are in fact foster siblings. We learn that Mildred's mother became an alcoholic during the Great Depression and decided to put her in foster care. Along with Edmund, the two were brought up by abusive parents, and here they formed a bond. Child Services stepped in and took them out of the house, and a kind caseworker there decided that they should stay together, and she put on the paperwork that they were blood relatives. The pair ended up going from home to home, suffering worse and worse abuse, and this eventually made Edmund gouge out the eyes of the pair that exploited them to child predators. Mildred ran into the night, and then they were split up. From this, you kind of get the feeling of why Ratchet is the way she is, and this could be handled with some real gravitas that I think would have brilliantly tied into the original. However, it's just so hammed up at points that it's difficult to really feel like the Ratchet we see here would go on to be the one in the movie. It's a far cry from the film, and as someone that was such a big fan of the original, I have to say I just felt on the whole the tone was too camp for moments like this to be taken seriously. So in my head, this just isn't canon. They tell her origin story really creatively with a puppet show, and then for some reason tell the exact same story again in a monologue, which just felt so baffling to me that I have no idea why it wasn't edited out. To see Ratchet turn into someone that operates in the shadows, secretly lobotomizing people, was almost a stretch too far, and I much preferred the grounded take that the movie had. In that, she was terrifying because she was allowed and enabled by the system to carry out horrendous acts, whereas here she feels like she's a sort of villain of the week that's comically carrying out crimes to the soundtrack of Cape Fear. Ryan Murphy has brought over his style from American Horror Story, and yeah, when a character is relieving Edmund through jail cell bars, it feels like a big departure from the source material. Things are made eye-rollingly bad by the story centered around Sharon Stone and her son Henry, and we learn that they're after the head physician Dr. Hanover, but this plot feels completely pointless looking back. He has a big arc with a hitman named Charles hunting him down, but it doesn't really go anywhere in the end, and even talking about it feels like needless padding in the video. I think the main problem I have with the show is that none of the characters are likable, whereas in the film you had a range of patients that all had their own charismatic aspects. Here it feels a bit hard to get attached because just how bad everyone is early on. Now we head into the latter part of the season with Ratched getting the position of head nurse after she blackmails Hanover. This ousts the current head nurse Bucket, who, though initially a villain, becomes quite a sympathetic character as we get into it. Hanover publicly embarrasses her at an organised dance at the hospital, and Mildred enacts a plan with her brother. However, this escalates with Edmund killing a party member, and in the chaos, Gwendolyn is shot by a nurse called Dolly, whom Ed had seduced. They flee into the night and lay low at a barn, whilst the police start to look for them. I got a lot of Joker and Harley Quinn vibes with the pair, and Dolly goes out in a blaze of glory trying to protect Edmund. It completely embarrasses the hospital, and the governor comes down hard on Hanover, completely overlooking his curing of a patient with multiple personality disorder named Charlotte Wells. The governor forces him to sign a paper saying that Edmund is sane and fit to stand trial, moving up his execution. Now, like most American Horror Story seasons, the show sort of has two endings, and though episode 7 feels like it would be the perfect way to close things out, we get two entries. Bucket goes to Ratched with recordings of her lobotomizing the only witness to Edmund's crimes, and we discover that Ratched lied in order to become a nurse. During the war, she became an angel of death that suffocated soldiers in acts of mercy. Bucket could expose her, but instead she extends an olive branch, and this leads to them working together to get funding for the hospital, and in doing so, Bucket also takes over Hanover's job. Hanover leaves his position and takes Charlotte with him, but she takes a turn for the worse and one of her darker personalities comes out, and this kills Hanover. I think the personality was also Jesse Owens, as they mentioned winning loads of gold medals against Hitler, but this season's so weird. Anyway, Ratched sends her off on a bus, which probably not the best thing to do with a person who's got multiple personality disorder and has just killed someone, but I suppose you're not a real nurse, and she takes Hanover's head to Lenore in order to complete their deal and get the money they agreed on. This allows her and Gwendolyn to ride off into the sunset, and we'll get into this in just a bit. Now, the caseworker who originally put Edmund and Mildred together returns, and we discover that the reason Edmund carried out the murders on the clergy in the first place was because they were complicit in the rape of his real mother before he was moved into the foster system. Mildred had tracked him down, but he lied about his release date so that he wouldn't be talked out of the killings. He also still holds a grudge against her due to her running away the night that he killed those that were abusing them. Mildred was meant to be there for him, but she just fled, and thus Edmund feels like she betrayed him whilst he gave everything to save her life. Edmund lied because he just couldn't trust her, and I think in this moment Mildred realizes how much a lie can damage someone, which is a real change for her. Pretty much throughout her entire life, she's believed that the way to survive is by twisting the truth for your own benefit because of how she's grown up. Though the caseworker is a kind person, had she not lied about them being brother and sister in order to allow them to move together, it's likely that Mildred would never have become caught up in Edmund's actions and crimes. These crimes caused her to commit her own, and the lies just spiraled out of control. Had she not lied about her skills in order to become a nurse, then she would have never been ousted and thus put on the path that we see in the film. She's pretty much lied at every possible opportunity and ran away from the truth, which plays massively into the ending. Ratchet ultimately wants to euthanize Edmund and strikes up a plan to do this, promising to see animals with him. This is of course another lie, and the further betrayal really hammers home how she should have just told the truth in the first place. I feel like the finale is really poking holes in the institution, and we see how Bucket has brought in highly underqualified people to work with the patients. Though I don't feel like she's the bad guy, she's pretty much just making the same mistakes as everyone in the institution makes, and these errors would of course lead to the events of the film being enabled. The state being useless is shown in an execution that goes all green mile, and it cements that those deciding the lives of these people in their care simply do not have the know-how to do so. Ratched, like many of the nurses that she works with, is completely out of her depth when it comes to dealing with the mentally ill, and it feels like she'd rather run away from it or take the easy way out. This is exemplified in her wanting to give Edmund a merciful death, like how she did to the soldiers in the war, but similar to that it backfires with her having to leave her post and going to hiding. Now a big spanner in the works comes with the return of Charlotte Wells. After taking a gun from Hanover's desk, she goes on a rampage to get to Edmund, and during this he discovers Mildred's plan to euthanize him. Charlotte breaks out with Edmund, and we have another time jump of 2 years, which is where we join Mildred and Gwendolyn in Mexico. After inviting Nurse Bucket to their home, we realise that Mildred is extremely paranoid and in some ways developing her own mental illness over the fear of her brother returning. Along with Charlotte, his killings have continued, with 7 nurses being murdered in Chicago. However, this is actually a reference to Richard Speck, who carried this crime out in real life, though it wasn't until 1966. Edmund calls her to threaten her, but Mildred stands her ground and tells him that he should be afraid. Mildred promises that she's coming for him, and we realise that it was her old landlord that sold her out. They hit the road after her, which ends the season, and though it seems like Ratchet is going to be looking over her shoulder, I actually think she'll come out triumphant. Now, the series as a whole is very much about her running away from things and how that ultimately doesn't work. In the film, Randall claimed to be insane in order to escape jail, and he believed that a mental institution would be an easier life for him, but ultimately it wasn't. The same thing happened with Ratchet, and whether it was her brother when they were fostered, or how she flees to Mexico, she's realised that one cannot truly escape their actions, and they will always be haunted. I think her finally facing up to this is the character coming full circle, and rather than fleeing once more, which is what the old Mildred would have done, she's going to stand her ground. I think next time that she will indeed take Edmund down, but Gwendolyn will get killed in the crossfire, as will Bucket. Ratchet basically needs to be forced to go back into caring for those with mental health issues, and in some ways she needs to be angry at them deep down in order to allow the treatment that she did in the film. To me, this is only possible if she somewhat blames the mentally ill like Edmund for ruining her life. We have seen that she can be compassionate to those with issues, so in order for things to go the way they do, she must have everything stripped away. I'm not sure whether I want another season, but at the moment that's how I can see it going if they indeed decide to tie into the film, which they might not even do. Now, as for my thoughts on it, I just feel like in the end there was a lot of filler here that didn't really amount to much. There was a needless cancer story, Dr. Hanover went out like a chump, and the latter part of the entry feels so disconnected from the first, it's almost jarring thinking back on what happened. I don't know if my love for the film has negatively impacted my view of this, but it feels like it really missed the point of the source material, and instead of portraying an earnest depiction of mental health, it turns it into a soap opera. Now, I think the American Horror Story hardcore fans will love this, as it's very in line. However, as someone who, though I enjoy the show, I know there's good and bad seasons, and I just feel like this is one that missed the mark. There's just so much filler and things that feel alien to the movie that I have no idea why they even bothered calling it a prequel. It could easily stand alone, and it probably wouldn't affect people's view of it. I wanted to see what caused the Ratchet that we'd come to hate, but I just don't feel like I get that here, and it massively just misses the point. Though it's not bad, this season just feels completely unnecessary, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Now obviously I'd love to hear your thoughts, so make sure you drop them below. If you want to see one of our other breakdowns, then check out our review of the latest episode of The Boys, which is going to be linked at the end. We're also giving away a free copy of the Christopher Nolan collection, and all you have to do to be in with a chance of winning is like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. The winner is going to be chosen at random on the 30th of September, so make sure you get involved. If you want to support the channel and get to see content early, then please consider clicking the join button below. You can also come chat to us on the Discord server linked in the description, or heavy spoilers on Twitter. Thanks for making it until the end of the video. You've been the best. I've been Definition. I'll tell you what, I'll see you next time, unless you hate this video, in which case I won't. But take care and have a good weekend. I love you. Goodbye.